it's clear that the offense, as you know, Justin, I'm sure you've watched some of Iowa football. If you've either done that or you've, stabbed your eyes with a pin. One of the two things.
Same
I'm sure
thing.
If he
you've done.
needed a nap, it's like watching golf on Sunday afternoon.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
But my point is, that Iowa has gotten, the numbers say they've gotten worse on offense. And I'm not surprised by that. It's funny, Justin. I come into these shows with Michigan fans, and I'm treated, he loves his team. He's a big homer. And then I go to my show, and people are like, you got to be a fan first. You're too critical. You're just a hater. So I just find that amusing. But I do think with the offense being worse by the numbers, there's just, they pulled the one-trick play out last year, the Gavin Williams pass to Monty Pottebaum. And I think the concept is okay. Do I love the idea of a running back throwing over the shoulder of a fullback? No. But I do think Iowa needs to be creative. And we've said this for years just on a game-to-game basis. But in a game like this against Michigan, with how the game went last year and just the stakes and the fact that you're struggling mightily on offense, be creative. And I know, I had talked with Don Patterson about potentially using Cooper DeJean in the Wildcat. That's not going to happen this week. I have hopes that maybe at some point they'll be creative with stuff like that. But LeVar Woods I'd like to think LeVar Woods is a very creative coach, and they can utilize his creativity, not only on special teams, but on offense, because it's going to be hard for Iowa to score points unless they're generated on defense. And Iowa proved against Rutgers that they can generate a lot of points on defense. They have the two safeties in the first game. They have 2 block punts against Iowa State. And what they did against Rutgers. So, you hope that maybe you can get J.J. McCarthy. This is going to be, has he ever been in an environment like this as a starter?
Not as a start. No, not at all. I mean, the only times that he's been in games like this were, 1-2 plays at a time against Michigan State, Penn State, Ohio State last year. But that's where I'll be most intrigued. There were times, even against Maryland's defense, who we know is not one of the top defenses in the Big Ten, where it felt like he was either trying to do too much or just like, the football was too fast for him. And then, he got caught up and made some bad decisions. So that's where I'll be most intrigued is obviously Iowa's defense is very good. Those linebackers are fast. Those DBs are fast. And so how does JJ, how does he catch up with that? How does he react when a guy breaks on a ball, faster than he's ever seen someone break on a ball as the starting quarterback? And so the thing that, I saw last week that I was intrigued by, and I'll be more intrigued this week because this is like playing, a top defense in the league, obviously, is when you make a bad throw or make a bad decision. Last year he would just come out, right? And Cade McNamara would go in. When you have to come back in and do, you live to play another down type of thing, how does he respond to that? So the whole JJ thing is going to be really interesting to me. Now, there were times where he made bad decisions last week. Ultimately, he still was 18 for 26 for 250 yards and 2 touchdowns with no picks. So, by the stat line, it's still pretty good. But, it'll be interesting to see how he handles probably being under pressure more than he ever has. We know that Iowa's defense scores more than their own offense. And so what happens if they do have a pick six? How do you respond like that?
And and the reason I asked, has he ever been in an environment? I couldn't remember if Cade started every game last year. I'm assuming he did.
He did. Yeah.
So I agree with you. I think that's probably the key is, and that's going to be the key in a lot of these big games involving Iowa this year. If you're Jim Harbaugh, you just tell J.J. McCarthy, look, we are going to be conservative. I don't think you go all out in this game. I really don't. Because the only way you really lose this game is if you start committing turnovers. That's the only way you win. I mean, unless Iowa pulls a rabbit out of its hat, why take risks? Why throw exotics at the Iowa defense? I personally don't think that's necessarily the way. Unless you have an exotic or a trick play or a go route that you've looked at on film and you say, yeah, we're very confident this is going to work, then sure, you're going to run that. But you do not put J.J. McCarthy in situations where he could cost his team points. And, as Mark brought up earlier too, Iowa knows how not only to recover fumbles and create interceptions. They know how to take them back to the house. They've got athletes on that side.
Yeah. And I after the last 2 weeks with what Blake Corum has done, I imagine they're going to ride that horse and see how far they can ride it. And Donovan Edwards will be back, is what we're hearing this week as well. So if you can have a 1-2 punch at the running back position, listen, Michigan had a lot of success last year when Cade McNamara turned around and handed the ball off. And I imagine Jim Harbaugh is going to try and do the same. But I wonder, Michigan's O-line, there have been times when they, obviously they were a big piece of Blake Corum rushing for 250 yards last week, but there have been times that they've showed that they're not quite the same offensive line that they were last year. So I'll be intrigued against a solid defensive front and those linebackers for Iowa, how they push them around and that type of stuff. But I agree with you. I think that they'll probably take a few deep shots as they have with JJ McCarthy. But they're going to get it to Luke Schoonmaker a lot, the tight end, and they're going to run the ball. And especially with Donovan Edwards back, if Blake Corum doesn't have to have 30 touches, that'll be really nice for him too.
And that's where Iowa's going to really miss not having Justin Jacobs this weekend, because being able to defend against Schoonmaker, do you trust Sebastian Castro to be that guy? Logan Klemp is not the athlete that Justin Jacobs is. So that hurts, losing Justin for the season, especially in a game like this with a really good tight end. And honestly, I said it months ago that Riley Moss was right coming back, because Justin, he won Defensive Back of the Year award, but I'm going to prove to Michigan fans for a second that I'm not all black and gold, right? He was not the best defensive back in the Big Ten last year, and I don't really think it was that close. That's no disrespect. I'm not saying he wasn't one of them, but he was susceptible to some big plays, and he's gotten beat this year, especially down in the red zone. He's gotten out of position, playing the wrong shoulder. He's got to figure out a way to be disciplined in this game. And, of course, the Ohio State game as well. Both of these games with really good skill position talent on the outsides. He's going to be I would think Jim Harbaugh, being a former quarterback, he would be a fool not to take shots in Moss's direction. And frankly, you take shots at DeJean's side as well. DeJean got beat on a play last week, and he's a young guy. As great as he's been, he's a young guy. And I think Terry Roberts might be the most disciplined guy back there. And if he doesn't play this weekend, then sure, take those shots. Right now, if I'm Michigan, I'm running, certainly, you know more about their schematics on offense than I do, but force Iowa to play three corners, because they don't have three corners with game experience right now. TJ Hall hasn't played much. He's a true freshman who didn't roll early. He's a really good football player. His father played for Coach John Patterson at Western Illinois, really good receiver, but he doesn't have any experience. And like I said, after that, they've got a walk-on from Humboldt, Iowa, that's never played. So I'd be stretching Iowa down the field. Iowa did give up a lot of deep, just exotic. I shouldn't say exotic plays. What's the word? Explosive plays last year.
You love the word exotic right now.
That's a term. It's a football term.
I should have started a counter at the beginning of the show here.
No, explosive plays. 20 plus
and
super explosive plays of 30 plus. I don't think they'd be exotic, but 20 plus or 30 plus plays. I'd be aiming for those, because Iowa was susceptible to those last year. They've done a lot better with that this year. I mean, they've been better. I mean, they've got the number one scoring defense in the country right now. And they have not played a great schedule, Mark, but Iowa State's, I think, an average. I think they're probably a 7-5 football team by the end of the year, maybe 8-4, and Rutgers is probably a 6-6 football team by the end of the year. And South Dakota State's okay. So they're going to be tested down the field, and I think that's the right move if you're Jim Harbaugh.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at, if you're saying that Iowa isn't very deep in the secondary. Well, Michigan is incredibly deep in the wide receiver room. So if I was them, I would say, let's hurry up. You can get 3 new wide receivers, go deep, again, and just keep doing that. You watched what JJ McCarthy did against Maryland, and he took 5-6 deep shots. And there were times where he overthrew them, but it wasn't by 10 yards. It wasn't a Joe Milton situation for Michigan fans out there. He overshot him by a couple yards. And so I fully expect them to take those deep shots again. And, if he hits 1 or 2 more of those deep shots for Michigan against Maryland, that is a 3 or 4 score game very quickly. And so that I expect them to do that. I also would expect them to do that right away on the road, take the pressure out, take the wind out of the stadium, and see what they can do. If they can land some of those deep shots, then all of a sudden, obviously, that opens things up underneath as well for Schoonmaker. I would love to see, and I think we will see, Donovan Edwards get some passes as well, because with Eric Hall out, then they don't have another threat really. Max Bredesen has stepped in really well as a redshirt freshman, but I expect to see Donovan Edwards get some not just carries but some balls out of the backfield in the passing game as well.
And Mark, just from the Iowa side of things, it's going to be interesting to see what Iowa who's going to be tested the most on the back end. I think obviously the obvious ones are Riley and Cooper. But Quinn Schulte is going to be tested probably more than he has. He's a new starter at free safety, so he's going to be tested. Can he be as good in coverage as Jack Kerner was last year? And I would expect TJ Hall to be on the field at times. It'll be interesting to see if Brennan Diaz-Fernandez is healthy. Will it be TJ Hall or will it be a Diaz-Fernandez? I'm guessing it'll be TJ Hall. They really like him. And Diaz-Fernandez doesn't have much experience either. So, again, I unfortunately, because I was golfing, I didn't see Kirk Ferentz's press conference today. So I don't know what the status on Terry Roberts is. But, boy, it'd help if they could get him back this week, just given the personnel for Michigan. One more thing, too, then I'll let you go, Mark. The defensive line is a story, Justin, because last year Iowa did not. That's the one part of the defense last year that wasn't great. They created pressure early in the season with I almost use the word exotics again, with some stunt action. And just for the people in the chat, they created some pressure and sacks early in the season with some stunt action along that defensive line, but they're better in one-on-one matchups this year. They're not dominant at any one spot, but boy, they are really good across. Boy, how many pressures, Mark, did Evan Simon, how many times did Simon get absolutely blasted last Saturday? I mean, that kid was on the field all night long. And Iowa's really close to being elite on the defensive line. They're really good right now, but just everybody along that defensive line, they're so deep. They're going to keep coming at Michigan. And again, you get pressure on J.J. McCarthy. It's going to be harder for J.J. I think people want to talk about him getting the ball downfield. They're going to get a much better rush than Maryland did or anybody else that he has seen all season. He has not faced a front seven like he's going to face on Saturday.
Folks, why not save money on your insurance, home, auto, all your insurance needs? We could list out all the availables at Gene Arthur Associates. We appreciate our sponsors, and we will leave the link in the live chat again, Gene Arthur Associates. It's www.jaainsurance.com. I'm going to leave the link in the chat. Again, you get an instant quote. It takes you a few seconds to get the quote, and why not save some money on your insurance? And obviously, as we've noted in recent weeks, a lot of donations go out, a lot of foundations from Gene Arthur Associates. So help out some families in need, save on your car insurance or your other insurance needs as well. Justin, the 2 points I wanted to hit on with JJ, and you noted the first one, the long throws, the overthrows. So I think he took like 5 or 6 deep shots. He hit Ronnie Bell in the third or fourth quarter. And before that, he missed on them. Now, from a talent standpoint, if your quarterback's going to miss, and you see keeps missing long, it's like, okay, well, he's got the arm strength. So we already knew that. And it's not, okay, well, our quarterback can't take advantage of this great wide receiver core because he can't get the ball downfield that far. So that's not an issue. That can be corrected. Although if he's doing this 4 weeks from now, it's like, well, we'd almost rather have the quarterback undershoot the receivers because then they can play back to the ball and high point it and bring it back in. So, that looks like can be corrected. There were a few times in which, it's different. And I talked about this with Steve Dace on his Michigan podcast today, that when JJ gets flushed out of the pocket and he decides, okay, I'm taking off. Okay, he's a runner. He's a threat to the defense. But there's a few times, one, he got himself in trouble and moved you out of field goal range. And then another time, I just thought a bunch of Maryland players took bad pursuit angles. They just weren't used to his speed. And he really could have trapped himself. Where against Iowa, and this is another thing Dace asked me. He's like, how can Iowa really expect to get two turnovers on Michigan and turn them into touchdowns? And I'm like, Probably not against Michigan, but if anyone's going to do it, that's just an aberration for anyone. Are you going to get 2 turnovers for touchdowns? But Iowa's been doing. They are the outlier of outliers that continue to do this. So when he dances around in the pocket with the ball down near his hip and he's juking guys, well, that's when a defense that's been taught to knock it out of his hand is going to look for that opportunity.
Yeah, and that's that's where I think that I'm really hoping, and I assume this is what happened, is they looked at the film and they said, "Hey, go down or get out of bounds," for 2 reasons. A, Iowa, this is the only way that they can score on us is on the defense, and B, we need you for this whole season, right? Especially with Cade McNamara out right now, they can't afford to have JJ take a blow. And get hurt here. So I think that, he's still young. He's 19, right? And so I think he's learning all that in real time. But, it's one thing to do it against Maryland. It's another thing to do it against Iowa's defense, who thrives on that type of thing. And so, I'm hoping that they looked at the film on that and said, all right, you get to turn one way, scramble that one way, and you either go out of bounds, throw it out of bounds, or, go run and slide to get the first down or whatever it is. And so, yeah, if I was concerned about JJ McCarthy, that's what I would be concerned about. I'm not concerned about his arm strength. He's shown us that he could hit those guys, whether he's, a few feet or yards deep. He's shown us already in the first few games that he can hit those guys. So I'm not that worried about that. But yeah, it's JJ trying to do, the thing I'm concerned about is JJ trying to do the Johnny Manziel and, make magic out of nothing. Although it's awesome at sometimes, it can turn into chaos badly, really quickly too.
I'm curious, Mark, your opinion. I'm not just saying that they are, but in your opinion, is Iowa, do they have a claim to potentially being the best defense in the country right now, or no?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they have a claim for being the most productive defense in the country, and that's all that matters is the performance out on the field. Do they have the most talented defense in the country? No, but that doesn't matter. They have a very talented defense, but those Georgia, Alabama defenses, and even throw in Ohio State and Clemson, but they are producing like nobody else except put Georgia in there. They are producing at that level as well.
And Georgia's played what? Oregon? Who else have they played that has a pulse?
That's any good? South Carolina. They held them to a touchdown in garbage time. It was 41-0. So
how good is South Carolina better than Rutgers, you think?
South Carolina is as good as Maryland.
Okay. I guess I'm just in that
range.
Yeah. And Iowa right now does have the best scoring defense, but I admit they have not played a juggernaut, and we'll get one on Saturday. Here's one reason that I do believe that Jim Harbaugh could take some shots on maybe some trick plays because of the youth back there. And I talked about injuries. That might be the one thing that I don't want to say Iowa, because certainly it's not Iowa's not getting guys injured on purpose, but that might be the one thing that baits Jim Harbaugh into taking shots, maybe unnecessarily, is because he sees some young guys out there that he can take advantage of, and that can either work out or that could backfire. And I've been wrong on that before. I've always thought, I don't know why Iowa State doesn't do that more. It seems like every time Iowa State runs trick plays, double passes, etc., they end up working, because at times those are the plays that the disciplined Iowa defense miss on. And the one guy we haven't brought up on Iowa's defense, Mark, might be the best player on the Iowa defense, and that's Jack Campbell. And as great as Blake Corum was this past week, boy, Jack Campbell's ability to help that front four in run stoppage is going to be huge, and Seth Benson as well. Iowa's ability to stop the run, that's obviously where it starts. You can say that in almost every game. You can stop the run, you're going to give yourself a chance. And I don't know if they should expect to be able to stop Blake Corum, but if you can hold him to under 100 yards, that's stopping Blake Corum.
Yeah. I also want to talk about Michigan's defense. I I mean, I know that it's painful for you guys to talk about the Iowa offense a bit, but Mark,
They
I wanted
do have
to
to play that direction too, right? They do have to play Iowa offense against Michigan defense. This is where, this is the problem.
If Iowa could just play defense all the time, they'd probably score more points.
You could make that claim. They outscored the offense this past week.
I made the point the other day. I said, when somebody brought that up, I said, yeah, maybe Iowa's strategy should be, at least for about half the field, let's give up a few first downs, because the longer we're out here, the greater chance that we'll look for an opportunity to turn them over and bring it back for 6.
And here's what's crazy. I don't have the numbers, the data in front of me, Justin, but if you looked, I'm guessing, this is just an educated guess, if you looked nationally at teams with the best starting field position, I'm guessing Iowa would be almost at the top of that list, which is incredible. Think about that. Now, we always bring up total offense, which has nothing to do with, starting field position, but the fact that they've scored 7 points, 7 points, 27 and 27. And one of those 27-point games was against one of the worst defenses in the country in Nevada. That's all in spite of the fact that they have a punter and defense that constantly puts them in scoring position. And I will say this, if this game ends up being a duplicate or a replica of all those other games earlier this year, it wouldn't shock me. If you recall, back in 2019, Iowa went on the road to Ann Arbor and Michigan won that game 10-3. Yeah. And if you'll recall, Iowa had a better quarterback. That was Nate Stanley. And Nate Stanley, that was not a good Iowa offensive line. The interior of that line was not very good. I'm not saying this offensive line's any better. But man, Iowa could not protect Nate Stanley. The difference with Nate Stanley is that kid was tough. He stayed on his feet. You probably remember that game, Justin. He was taking hit after hit after hit and just would not go down. But I tell you, they were constantly inside between the Michigan 40 and 50, and they could never get it quite past the 40 or past the 35. I don't know how many times they went up empty from that part of the field. And so field position is crucial, but you got to do something with it.
I'd have to look it up, but I believe Michigan recorded 8 sacks or something like that. It's ridiculous that day. I remember that was one of Aiden Hutchinson's coming out parties when he first really burst onto the scene, obviously before his senior year. But I agree. It's one of those. It's a fascinating case study on Iowa's defense versus Iowa's offense and how they can't make it work. But Mark, I wanted to ask you as well, when you're looking at Michigan's defense, obviously we didn't find anything out from the first 3 games. We all know that. We've talked about it, beat that horse to death for sure. But you go out and you play Maryland's offense that probably is top 5 in the Big Ten-ish, I would say, or close to that. And you hold them to 27, and the last 7 happened, within the last minute of the game. So, ultimately the Michigan starting defense holding them to close to 20-ish points. Do you feel like that defense made a bit of a statement, like they can play with the big dogs?
Yeah, so they held Maryland under 400 yards total offense. They held their running game, which we think of Maryland, big play receivers. They're throwing the ball all over the field. But if you look at their numbers going in, they did want to run the ball. They do have explosive running potential out of their backs, and Michigan held their top back to 3 yards even per carry, Hemby. So Michigan did, held the game, the run game in check. Michigan's corners held up well against Maryland's wide receivers, which are a top 3 to 4 room in the Big Ten. The only place where I felt as though Michigan wasn't that effective was it seemed as though Maryland's offensive line protected Talia extremely well most of the game.
Yeah, and I thought too. I mean, he also obviously Talia is very mobile as well, and I thought there were times where Michigan was right there, had him close to wrapped up, and he escaped it. So that's where I could see in this game against Iowa, I could see Michigan finally getting to the quarterback. Yes, Iabioki, I believe, Jim Harbaugh said in his press conference yesterday to expect more Iabioki in this game. And so I can see him coming, and we all know Petrus isn't Talia Tagovailoa. So
he's not.
Is that the first time you're? Oh my! I'm
this
sorry
is
to
new.
break
This
it
is
to you.
this is earth shattering, Mark.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Petrus probably has a lot of exotic things.
I probably won't
out.
have Justin on ever again after that take. That's just way off.
Sorry, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'll try and reel it in here.
He looked like a racehorse on Saturday, Mark. Did you see Spencer run a couple of times? He ran on like 3rd and 9. I don't mean to make fun of him, but it was like 3rd and 9 2 or 3 times, and he's like just huffing it, and he ends up getting like 3 yards.
Oh my gosh. It's
yeah.
That's where I think Michigan's going to get to the quarterback because Michigan fans have been begging for Michigan to get to the quarterback. They did it in their second game of the year, had 8 sacks, but since then have not had many at all. So I think they get to the quarterback, and I think that they kind of disrupt some things in an offense that doesn't need any disruption. And so yeah, we'll see how that goes, but that's how I see the defense going. I think it's going to be to me, this game, depending the outcome of this game, and I'm going to call it I'm predicting a win for Michigan, but it's going to be how big of a win for Michigan. Is it close or is it not close? Will be if Michigan does hit those deep shots and beat Michigan or beat Iowa on the back end.
So what's the score? You can't just say, well, I'll leave it open. What's the score? Give us a score.
I think that it is probably a 35-13 or 10 game.
So I'm just curious. You think Maryland is that much better than Iowa?
I think Maryland's offense is a lot better than Iowa's. Yes.
No, that's not what I asked, because that's not the only side they're playing the ball.
I do. I think that Maryland is better than Iowa.
Okay. Listen, I think it's a better offense, no question about it. But I still think Iowa's a better football team because I think Iowa's defense is elite. Now, with that being said, I'm not going to give my score prediction here. My score prediction will not be that lopsided. I can say that right now. But I was wrong last year. So
I can say that when I was on Michigan podcast today, he said, I want a prediction out of you. And I said, I don't do predictions on Tuesday. I haven't even thought about it. I don't know. And then he said, okay, 10.5 points. And I said, again, I'm not making a prediction, but if somebody held a gun to my head, I'm taking Iowa and 10.5.
Let me just, go ahead, Mark.
Do you know, Corey, do you know the story behind what the player that Florida's highlighting here? This is Ayabi Anoma. Have you heard the story on this defensive end edge rusher for Michigan?
I see the guy that was it Joel Klatt said it might be the next David Ojabo. I caught that in the broadcast on Saturday. Anybody else hear that? He said he was a guy that nobody had heard of that they think could maybe step into the David Ojabo's role.
It could have been.
The deal with this kid is that he barely played any high school football, but he's a freak of an athlete. He's from, is it Nigeria, Justin?
I'm not exactly sure, but it is. He's
somewhere overseas.
Foreign. Yeah.
Yes. And he played a lot of soccer and other sports, but he started playing high school football. He was so good and so talented that even despite the lack of reps in high school, he was still rated what was the ridiculous? It was something like he was a top 50 all-time recruit.
It was, I believe it was like the 43rd all-time recruit of
ever.
Any
position ever. Yeah. 5-star, number 1 edge rusher. He went to Alabama. He saw the field a little bit, had issues off the field. Not going to go into that because I don't know what the details there. Then he goes to he gets lost somewhere in JUCO or somewhere or some kind of FCS school. And he even goes to another major
last
program.
Chance U situation, honestly.
Yeah, and he was at another major program, and he never stepped up.
Martin.
Where was that?
UT Martin.
UT Martin, not a major program, but another. Before he's landed at Michigan, and now Michigan's taking him in, and boom, first play he gets on the field, sack.
He's been one of the only guys that has been continually getting to the quarterback when he's gotten in. So I think he's earned his spot to get more snaps here. And so I can see him, bursting onto the scene. He's a guy that he arrived to Michigan 2 weeks before the season started. And so he's still learning a lot of things where, obviously as an edge rusher, a lot of it, you just need to pin your ears back and go. And so I think he's really good at that. And if they can figure it out, which it sounds like they are, if they can figure it out where that's all he needs to know, he's going to be pretty good for Michigan.
Just curious, and I know we're trying to wrap this up pretty soon, Mark, but and this doesn't mean anything, but it's just an exercise. I'm curious to see what Justin's take on it is. When Michigan's let's just take it both ways. When Iowa's offense is playing Michigan's defense, who's the best player on the field?
When Iowa's offense is playing Michigan's defense,
yep,
the best player on the field is Junior Colson.
Okay, I won't argue that. The only guy that I could even say would even be in the conversation would be Iowa's tight end Sam Laporta. He's a really good tight end, but I don't know anything about Junior Colson. I'm sure I'm not going to argue that. What about on the other side when Michigan's offense is against Iowa's defense? I think that one's harder, right? That one's harder to call. Blake Corum.
It probably is Blake Corum, but I think you could argue. I think you have a couple arguments.
Yeah, I think Jack Campbell was certainly in the discussion. Mark, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great debate all over the place. The offense on the Iowa side versus the Michigan defense. Yeah, Laporta was the first name that came to mind, but other than that, it's a Michigan slam dunk, and Junior Colson's turning into a star.
Yeah,
among a tremendous Michigan defense that could turn out to be an elite unit. Versus obviously Iowa is such an aberration on offense, Corey. We're having conversations here that we wouldn't have with almost anybody else in the country, that especially out of a successful program, because the offense is so deplorable. It's unbelievable.
And don't forget about the fact that the tight end, I'm not saying that he's the least important player on offense, because he's not, but he can only do so much.
Yeah.
I'd rather have
the line's got a block for the quarterback, and the quarterback actually is to deliver the ball.
Yeah, it's kind of like Tyler Linderbaum last year. It's kind of like him. Center's a very important position, but Tyler Linderbaum was one of the best players in college football last year, and he was on the Iowa offense, but it didn't matter. They were still 123rd out of 131 teams. And Justin, fun fact for you, Iowa was the first team to ever be ranked 131st in total offense, because there's never been 131 teams in the FBS. All right. So they're number 131 in FBS in total offense. They're number 1 in the FBS in scoring defense. Wrap your mind around that for a second.
It's so hard to do. It's so hard to do. And that's why I said it's a case study. Like, seriously, somebody needs to go in and analyze people's brains on how this got so lopsided. It's unbelievable, really. I also saw, I can't remember after what week it was, but Spencer Petras had a 3 QBR, which I didn't know was possible.
Yeah,
I know.
Mark, I did not know.
Well, I was just pointing to you as being the person that's made a case study of it week after week after week after day after day.
That's why I said it earlier. Like, all the Michigan fans here in the chat calling me a homer. It's like they have not watched this show for the last 9 months, because I have been on the Iowa offense like flies on a piece of elephant dung. It's
Dustin,
been
for 6 months as transfer quarterbacks hit the portal one after another with experience, with good track records. We were like, what's going on here? You got a quarterback with 9 touchdown passes, 10 touchdown passes last year. What are you doing?
I'm wondering, I said this on our podcast too, and this is honestly not a shot. I actually think it's a fact. I think Michigan has 4 quarterbacks that would at least battle for the starting job at Iowa.
I agree. I agree with that. I agree. I think you could say that about a lot of programs. Justin, let's not forget last year Purdue played Iowa. They deployed 3 quarterbacks, and I think all 3 of those quarterbacks would have started at Iowa.
It blows my mind. In the world, you would think in the world of the transfer portal, this is the easiest time ever to fix this problem that they have. Easiest time in the history of college athletics to fix the problem.
You're preaching to the choir, man. You're preaching to the choir.
The problem is, for you.
They missed a window this past offseason. I'm sure it's going to be. We already got the Boise State kid in the portal. It's going to be a productive offseason with transfer quarterbacks, but they missed the boat this past offseason. It was the time to do it, and they decided not to do it. So even if they do it this next offseason, they missed the boat. I mean, they have an elite defense right now, and you brought up how it's amazing that Iowa can have maybe the best defense in the country and maybe the worst offense in the country at the same time. Mark and I have talked about this at length. Can you imagine what Iowa's defense would be if they at least had an offense that could be average? I mean, can you imagine? Because that defense, I think the better question is not how the offense got so bad. The better question is, how has the Iowa defense stayed so dominant throughout all of it? I mean, Phil Parker, I believe Phil Parker, now you can call me a homer if you want. I think Phil Parker is the best defensive coordinator in the country. And I don't think anybody in the country, and there's not a program in the country that I think can dominate that conversation in the opposite direction, because who in the country is recruiting at the, I shouldn't say low level because Iowa's done decent, but at the level Iowa is, and yet responding with this dominant of a D, and you pair it with that with the fact that they've got an offense that's like nothing there. I mean, there's nothing there. Right, Mark? I mean, you need to do it. This is what you need to do, Mark. You need to, I always tell you what you should do. You need to create videos on the best coordinators in the country, because I want to hear what you say about the defensive coordinator, because I know there's a lot of good ones, but boy, I don't know how you could stake a claim that anybody's better right now than Phil Parker.
I hear you. I know. Too much ground to cover right now, though. We appreciate Justin being here. We'll pick off this super chat real quick. We appreciate Wes Weber, the Michigan fan, contributing to the Iowa show. Thank you so much for that, Wes. What makes Iowa's defense elite and not Michigan? Well, we will get back to that after the two match up. And yards per play, yes, that's a long conversation right there. But before we leave, we want to make sure that everyone knows where to catch Justin. Justin, where can everybody find you?
Yeah, check us out at blueby90.com. We've got a couple different podcasts there. Go to our Blueby90 Twitter as well, where we're most active.
Awesome. Justin, appreciate you stopping by.
Of course. Thank you guys for having me. I apologize. I come in and disrupt things, and I get Corey all riled up away. But
listen, anybody who actually knows me, I think Mark knows this, and it's funny reading some of the chats in the comments of people who are like, "Oh, Corey, you need to settle down." I get worked up, but I'm not actually worked up. Like, this is, I enjoy this debate.
I love it.
I'm not trying to be Stephen A. Smith here, but I enjoy the debate, and so no, I appreciate you coming on the show.
For sure. Anytime you guys want me, I will be back every year, because this has been my favorite. I don't know why there's like a rivalry. Everybody wants to be Michigan's rival. I'll say that, and that's not a shot at Iowa either. It just seems to be like, I don't know. Everyone hates.
Well, as Rich Eisen made a point of saying, there's no good rivalries that don't involve Michigan.
That's
right, Mark. Mark.
So
Mark.
I could not tweet out fast enough at Rich Eisen after that comment. You know, like, really, if you spend any time in the Big Ten, you're supposed to be a Big Ten guy here.
Rich is a very big homer. He's a very big homer.
And Justin letting us know that even if the scores reverse 42-3, he's going to have just as great a time on the show next time.
Well, I don't know about that, but okay. I'll still come on.
Thanks, Justin.